Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the final week of 615. I hope by this week you getting some of the ideas around crisis leadership, crisis management, and crisis communication. So I've got 3 modules on this subject. They're all connected, and we are at the best time to learn about this subject this year. It was hard to show the importance of this unit before COVID-19, but I think this year we are all experiencing one crisis all at the same time. So it's a bad year, of course, but I mean it's probably we can think about COVID from a more positive angle. Right, so this week we will be talking about experts as decision makers. And I want to share a little bit about understanding consulting service in humanitarian emergency disaster management sector. So before we start, imagine about yourself advising some of the folks within the government sector, the public sector. But as you also noticed that by now you could actually help any business sector to think about crisis management. Because we talk about crisis communication, we talk about how they make decisions amid uncertainty, and also how can they show better leadership in times of crisis. Now, the talk about expert and consulting is you won't find much in disaster management literature, because very often this is like MBA school kind of thinking. But I think I get exposed to this idea when I did my PhD. So I studied under a very old German scholar called Hans-Dieter Evers. So Hans is pretty good at understanding knowledge, sociology of knowledge, and knowledge governance, how data, information, and knowledge are being used in informing public policy making. So I extend that kind of concept into humanitarian emergency and disaster management. So and I like this. I keep using this The Economist magazine about the firms, the consulting firms that very often being used by critical media. But media are always critical about these multi-billion-dollar consulting industries that often thrive in the times of crisis like this. So, and this is quite obvious in 2008, where during big economic crisis, the businesses that actually survive and then thrive is consulting businesses. I always call myself as kind of bloodsucker when we work in the humanitarian setting. We get good money out of misery of people. I know that I try to kind of not bullying myself, but trying to be mindful about where we operate. But outside in the world, this is business. So what we can think about is how can we deliver business that is humanitarian at the same time. So the topics that I'm trying to cover is leaders and their advisors, the role of experts and consultants, and a little bit about knowledge service concept, and some observation regarding the demand in knowledge expert, a globalized framework for local action, consulting markets, how to conduct a little bit of consultancy in the space if you are up to the challenge, if you are interested, and trying to think about evaluation services as one of the areas for consulting. So this slide I picked it up yesterday before thinking about what else I need to add to this talk compared to last year. So I tried to look at Deloitte. Not sure whether I pronounce it correctly, but here it is. They actually get 47 billion revenue for the first 9 months this year, and it's a kind of 5.5 increase in growth. And if you want to see their consulting services, it grew 7.1% in the middle of crisis. So it tends to suggest that whenever you have crisis, people like us might get some jobs to save the world in a way. A little bit cynical, but that's kind of reality nowadays. And that's not a new thing. If you look at the global source, the global research, especially the report about Australia consulting market 2019, please have a look for this year. I'm not sure whether the new report has come up, but very often this came out in the big media report. So in this case, like last year, the report that Australia consulting industry grew rate in 7 years with a value of local advisory market more than 8.1%. So it was around US 5.41 billion in 2008. And as you see, Deloitte is probably not representing all, but the rate this year is not that bad. And you can see FEMAconsultants.com. This is what happened in the US as well. I'm sure in Australia we got some of them, but this is like pretty easy to search because you search FEMA consultants and then it came out. So there are consultancy for local governments on how to tap FEMA money, the federal money, and this is like one of the services that is provided by these fellows. And you could also look at the some of the news regarding some of the consultants being paid $4.25 an hour as a FEMA consultant. This kind of framing is a dangerous framing. Because, in reality, the guy might not be able to work 8 hours a day and days in a week. I mean, usually our imagination is just like very wild when we look at the number, but certainly this is a big money. So we think that this is, so to be more positive, I think this is a good market, right? So we need to put ourselves to tap the market. So think about this is like an MBA class, not humanitarian class. So why there is a demand on expert knowledge? Well, expert knowledge is used to legitimize decision making. So if you have a policy and you develop it on your own without expert knowledge, it suffers from legitimacy. Even though you might come up from at the same conclusion, the same idea, but you need to be backed up by expert knowledge. So in that sense, you kind of provide some degree of legitimacy to the decision making. And in many cases, decision makers try to offload their responsibility to experts. So one day when it goes wrong, they say that, well, that's based on expert knowledge. That's the best knowledge available to us at this point of time. So Expert knowledge in many ways reduces the complexity and uncertainty in response and allows decision makers to base their action on the executive summary of the reports prepared by experts and consultants. I mean, we are talking about you and me. So when we have greater risk and security, when we are faced with complexity and the demand of accountability, then there is a greater need for expert knowledge. That is a very basic kind of knowledge already in the sector. So I cite this from Thomas Menkoff and Hans-Dieter Ever's paper. It's already like 11 years ago. So the context here is we have to ask the questions how to make a difference as a consultant. And as a consultant, you try to offer some kind of meaning-making services in the middle of a crisis. And the more complex the problems, the more uncertain the problems, the more demand in consultancy. That is always the law. So we have to look at the big picture like this and trying to throw ourselves into the questions, into the picture. So you will also look at the NGO sectors. Humanitarian sector used to be dominated by NGOs. But so because NGOs provide certain degree of expert knowledge. But nowadays, it's no longer the case. They are still relevant, but if you look at the change in donor policy, sometimes big firms won the contracts, services for managing the government's money. There are heaps of them, and it's kind of a very booming consulting businesses in development sectors and also in humanitarian sectors. So experts are seen as kind of policy drafters. Very often we kind of get into the drafting of policy. I used to work with DFAT at least years ago, and most of the projects that the government of Australia through DFAT, I think development projects are often designed by experts in general. I think pretty much always the case. So you are contracted to design certain programs that, you know, from understanding context and providing justification why it is important to consultation with the stakeholders that would be the beneficiaries of the project. Very often it's all done by consultant. Of course, we will be kind of brokers. So we picking up brains from DFAT, from the recipient governments and so on. In many ways, you behave like policy drafters. Of course, it's kind of project, but it's the project itself is kind of shaping policy in certain countries. So I think we need to think about the landscape of consulting industry in our sector. And in doing so, I think we could also allow ourselves to think about where we want to move into that sector or not in the future. Because if you want to be positive about the sector, you can think about making a difference as well. Because we know that there is a demand in human resources, there is a demand in policy reform, there is the world is getting more uncertain, and you know, like the FUCA world, the vulnerable, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It's kind of the world we are living, and the more we are getting into the FUCA kind of settings, the more you need expert knowledge. So we have to be ready about this. Right. So the strategic importance of knowledge brokers. Experts and consultants sell knowledge. We know it. The modes of work can be freelance, self-employed professionals, or you can be members of a consultancy firms. What we assume is, in general, we are consultants are not producer nor the end user of knowledge. So you are somewhere in between. So we sometimes call this knowledge traders, try to buy and sell knowledge. Buying means that you have some investment costs, right? Like going to university like this, you get some ideas, and then you can actually trade or turn that into a knowledge services businesses. And in that case, you have to ensure that you have access to information that are needed, and also the experience. In general, this is like a growing worldwide. The quality of their professionalism is a benchmark for the stage which a knowledge-driven economy and knowledge society. So knowledge-driven economy and knowledge society is kind of the key terms when this idea came about like 10, 20 years ago. There is a big debate about this. If you look at the South Asian countries, so I'm talking about some of the research from Hans-Dieter Evers. So Hans talks about the differences between Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore in framing the beginning of 21st century. For Singapore, they call this is the period of knowledge economy, knowledge society. Indonesia focused on information society. And according to them, they made the prediction like tens of years ago. But the outcomes will be that Singapore will outcompete others because they know that knowledge is actually higher than information. Because some of the countries focus simply on information. You have hierarchy of knowledge. From data, you turn it into information, and then from information, you turn it into knowledge. I mean, this is semantics and quite boring because sometimes I feel like it's kind of overclaimed, but overall, there is some kind of legitimate ideas and logic behind this argument. And I think I somehow when I was young, I think it was a great idea that if the way you frame the problem is also signaling about your focus. And in the world of disaster governance, we can think about proxy for demands for more consulting services. Here's my take about the implementation of Sender framework. I think it's going to be fail. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but the more it fails, the more you have got a job. I think, because I think governments are not quite ready in transforming the structure of the formal institutions, that becoming more like service-oriented institutions. So, but at the moment, I think knowledge is critical for reducing risk, and that is coming out from Sender. Knowledge can save lives, and there is a kind of bolder call to build knowledge of governance, civil society, communities, and private sectors. The World Humanitarian Reform came up with the idea of a lot of things. It's called Grain Bargain. And the Grain Bargain has like 9 to 10 kind of deals, like agenda. One of the agenda is localization of humanitarian response. So even if you want to localize the systems, you need expert knowledge on how to localize it. So in the end, it sounds like the more you create demands, the more we need some inputs. That means consulting services as well. Post Paris 2015, there is a greater call for climate change adaptation consultants. If you look at the GGGI, gggi.org, that is based in Korea, they keep calling consultants probably every week. So the more we have problems, the more we have global agenda, the more we need to create jobs, because there are necessary steps to make things materialize. Right. And the prediction for the future is we are going to have more, density in urban contexts. The prediction about the future is not that quite great, especially post-COVID world. We need to think about this as well. So who is an expert? We try to think that expert is kind of professional knowledge broker, while it might bring some kind of knowledge. But as a consultant, we think that it is not necessarily somebody who has the knowledge, but they're quite smart in packaging the ideas. So they sell specific applied knowledge to the clients. And the clients can be United Nations, can be NGOs, can be governments. So in this case, we talk about tacit and also explicit knowledge that can be traded on the ground. Yeah, so you will see some of the news here, like I think this is from Guardian and also Telegraph, talks about DFID spending, DFID spending on consultant to come under increased scrutiny. So 1.4 billion foreign aid contractors at the cost of external consultant. It's kind of greater than 10% of the aid budget. So this is we used to be at the other side. So I grew up as an NGO, the critical ones, a little bit leftist, and we used to be very cynical about $1 a day consultant. In Banda Aceh, where we work, we have to face the challenge from the local community, local activists, asking the questions: how much you pay for the consultant? Like they feel like they have the interest to know more about that. They heard that some of the United Nations agencies are paid this 1,000 pound sterling a day consultant. We could not imagine until I became like a scientist, and then we are sold by university around that number, $1,000 a day kind of payment. Of course, the money goes to university. The contract came through university. They're happy to provide the service because we get access to knowledge and information. But for the people out there in the field, they feel like this is like it's like business, not humanitarian kind of thing. And you will be surprised that Wall Street Journal very often put some likes on this matter. So like US government spend on management consulting climbs to 54.7 billion in 2015. I used to work with a US government project. It was a big project. So we were to write like less than 50-page report. And it requires like a month kind of research. The money was kind of $250,000 US for the whole project. I was feeling guilty at the time because we feel like this is like a little bit too much. Of course, the money that came in our pocket is fairly small because that's the firm. So the firm got like 80% of the money. Yeah, so, but at the time, like, being somebody in developing world at the time, we kind of being grateful because if you don't get this money, you never get the experience to get the information at bigger scale. Because by joining this kind of firms, we were able to visit 12 provinces, reading 400 reports from villages. So that's kind of very rich experience. But yeah, I think it's good to be mindful about, try to find the balance between business and humanitarian at some point. So when I look at the UK context where they criticize this foreign aid, I think they must be shocked when they look at the US number as well. What about us? Yeah, so consulting business in humanitarian is not new for sure. And once upon a time, when you call humanitarian as an industry, it was kind of an insulting kind of. But now it's normal. When you say humanitarian industry, it's just normal. Because the way we understood about industry from university point of view, the real world kind of work, whether it's government or whether it's non-government, it's industry. So it's no longer a big issue anymore. More disasters and crisis means big money for consultant. Is it true or not? Expert can create demand for their service. But yeah, there is this convention of humanitarian, the consultant manifesto, that you probably need to read. That argues that consulting is no license to make easy money, but it's about how to make a difference. So there are some people like this who try to be mindful, getting a balance. Not sure whether it's just to be feeling good about ourselves or is it like a genuine kind of response, but it's worth it. Yeah. So in Australian context, the same thing. You look at the some of the newspaper here talk about spending of $1 billion a year on consultants, and you can go on and on in the internet. Yeah. So this is based on the Australian context, where governments of Australia spent like almost close to $1 billion consultant in 2016. It was like up 7.5%. And if you look at the Department of Prime Ministers and Cabinet, recorded a sharp increase in spending on consultancy. Contracts recorded in the department's annual report grew by 20%, from 104 to 125 contracts. So the amount spent on the contracts doubled. This is always, so it's good that we have media also to put some light on this, so it can be controlled in a way. So the irony here is, even if you want to promote like local knowledge, like community-based disaster risk management, meaning that in order to reduce the risk and vulnerability and to build resilience, you have to ensure that local communities that becoming like the key actors. But even in doing so, you need experts. That is kind of paradox that we're living with. Because people can challenge your norms and assumptions about certain things, including some sort of populist ideas around how things can be done. So what we argue here is producing and transmitting knowledge is important, and we try to be positive with the consultant because I think we have to treat them as somebody who try to connect the dots so they can utilize knowledge that are being produced and then being used. And overall, I think in Southeast Asia Pacific, including Asia in general, you won't see many humanitarian think tanks. I think when we think about this, and if you want to do some sort of contribution, maybe we need to think about how can we build somewhere in the region as well. So I often use this opportunity to talk to students from the Philippines or from the Fiji or from the Pacific to try to build their own consulting industry if you want. If you can study about how to run a consulting industry, there could be market. And try to use this kind of class participant as kind of your networks that can be used. So, and this is important. This is a very important. Very often we create a problem. Yeah. So as a consultant, you have to problematize certain things. It's not always for the, with the bad motives or something. But we kind of create humanitarian problems for which we can actually offer solution. It's also a paradox. So sometimes you can be provocative around this. You talk to the bosses and you say, whether you have this or not. And they say, we don't have this, you can actually highlight that probably you need this or that. So you need to create demand. So this is like pure business in a sense.
But that's the knowledge.
Yeah.
You have the information, and then you transfer it to something to suit you.
Exactly. So I'm trying to be devil advocate at the same time, try to. Yeah. So it's worth it. Yeah. I agree.
What you need to create your own job.
Yes. So in this case, we try to theorize that by arguing that you try to create virtual realities and convince clients that they're being treated to the latest and the most up-to-date knowledge. And then try to come up with a good framing using the right language and authorized concept that is essential for success. And then, of course, at the end, you have to provide a quality report. So this is one of the things that we often see. The success or failure is often based on the elegance of report rather than an actual performance of the consulting service itself. So think about this, you might need a team. So I try to look at this kind of debate and discussion from more peer-reviewed journals. And we cannot find much in the context of disaster. So I pick it up from mining sector, which is very often quite available. So what we found from environmental resistance as a driver for demands in expert knowledge. So the more you have like critical NGOs, the more you have consultants. That's also a paradox. So in this case, environmental consulting firms and mining firms are kind of codependent. Consultants serve mining firms as informal facilitator. In the licensing process, consultants serve as risk absorption instruments for mining companies. Consultants have a slight positive impact on miners' environmental management. So in this case, we are kind of torn between technical expertise and being mining boosters. It's a good paper. Boom time for technocrats. How environmental consulting companies shape mining governance. So don't underestimate your role as a consultant. This is a big thing. Now I always like this Woodrow Wilson quotation. What I fear is a government of experts. God forbid that in a democratic country we should resign the task and give the government over to experts. And this is what we talk about expert knowledge as kind of necessarily used to be to legitimize decision making. But sometimes we are simply being used to justify what they already believe. So I think we need to be smart as well in that context. Yeah, so there are lots of jobs of global humanitarian jobs. I think some of you must have been familiar with this by now. Keep looking if you are interested. So this is, I quote this from patterns of call for jobs applicants. Project evaluation, sectoral specialist consultant, case study, lessons learned consultant, writer, monitoring evaluation, fundraising, and so on. There are heaps and even more. So this is not the whole stuff. Now, I think I adapted from a very old concept from Harvard Business Review about what can we do in regards to provide some more effective consulting services in the context of humanitarian settings. I think the direction is more important, but we need to also be more realistic. There are jobs around baseline information. So NGOs nowadays are challenged to have a strong monitoring and evaluation performance. So in that sense, big NGOs often start everything with baseline study. And you can focus yourself also on that kind of services. But sometimes there are also opportunities around solution-driven kind of consulting. Can be also fundraising or lobbying policymakers. But you can also talk about diagnosis that might redefine the problems that we are facing, recommendation, provision. Sometimes you are called to assist in informing implementation of certain projects and so on. But we expect that overall, all these, whatever focus that you are trying to work on, we expect that the way we could make a difference is try to improve the effectiveness of the intervention. So I think this is pretty old concept, but can still be useful when we want to think about consulting. Let's discuss some of stuff that you are talking about in the line. I think Sean is talking about fee should come with responsibility and accountability. Yes, I think that's right. Fee is not there just for the sake of the fee, but yeah, it should signal some certain quality of the consultant as well. Not necessarily always the case, but that should be the norm. Any questions from the floor here, Darwin? No planning to run a consultant?
No, it's not a question, it's something
Like, it's not a question, it's something about the knowledge that we talked about it before. It's about how people sometimes depend about knowledge people, and some countries depend about information people. But to have the knowledge, you need that information.
Yeah.
Because from some of my research, like about knowledge, it was like, it's how you see the information, how you receive the information. Some people receive the information and keep it as it is. Some people receive the information and transform it to something that they can make a use out of it. So in the crisis, which is the most important thing as a leader in the crisis ship or as a consultant, you need to be able to change and to see more than the info. Like when you have an information, or you have, because in the middle of the crisis or in the middle of the pandemic, you will have little informations at the beginning, so you need to know how to deal and to transfer these information quick and fast for something to help you to make decisions and to be consultant that people can depend on. Because even as a consulting, it's not an easy job, even if it's
No.
a good pay money. Like, we talk about all the advantage of it. It's a good money, good thing, good stuff. But if you failed once, that will be it.
Yeah.
In your CV gonna be that you failed in these things. It's a risky job. It's one of the very risky job to be a consultant, because it can put you high or down. So they pay them good money, but if you failed, your next job gonna be limited and limited and limited to get to the other jobs, because you can't add to your CV that you make bad decisions.
There are two things. So the last one on the failed thing, I think is not a straightforward kind of thing. So when you talk to experienced consultants, they say that out of 20 services that you provide, 2 might fail, still have 90%
Yeah.
success. So at least
You make something process.
18 projects, so 18 stakeholders still remember you as some kind of consultant.
But still, like, even the consultant now in the coronavirus thing, like the people that they're consulting about how we deal about coronavirus and how we deal with many things, it's still uncertainty, and some of their decisions, it's not working. Like, to make the isolation or the lockdown that they make it, for most of the countries nowadays, the second wave is hitting harder than the first wave.
Yeah.
So it wasn't something that's the thing with the consulting job. Sometimes you face something like coronavirus, first time ever. It's hard to make decision. You don't know. People are gonna blame you a lot. People that they're having second wave are blaming the people that they make them at the first place look down and spend all that money on these
Agree.
things.
So there is always uncertainty in the knowledge, and what you do in consulting is you provide knowledge and probably a little bit of information. And it's not your fault if things don't work, because there are conditions that you need to also put there. Sean, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I was just going to sort of say, my feeling is that the reason that there's probably not a lot of litigation against consulting is that they tend to be giving advice to governments, and because there's no real accountability with the government, they tend to hide it behind that. And I think that if all of a sudden we started having a situation where political leaders were made accountable for the decisions that they made, I think you'd then find that when they get advice off consultants, they would be pushing the consultants to back it up with that, hey, if you give me the wrong advice, then basically you're liable. And that's why a lot of consultants have, like I've got a professional indemnity insurance, and a lot of other, most consultants actually do, but you quite often you find that when those consultants are giving advice to government agencies in a situation, they should be qualifying whatever they give them anyway. But I think a lot of them are actually hiding behind the fact that there's no real accountability against government agencies for making bad decisions, and until that actually changes, then nothing's going to change in the consulting market.
That's right. Right. And what do you think about the global promotion of evidence-based consulting that used to be kind of one of the dominant discourse around this, but I think starting from the failure of, I think, the Democrat candidate in 2016, then people think that maybe evidence-based approach is kind of being compromised because it doesn't deliver the results. Yeah, so I think, thank you for that. I think I'm also curious about your talk about insuring yourself as a consultant when it comes to advising governments. Have you ever used that kind of service, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, these days, you can't even become registered as a consultant unless you have, you meet certain criteria, and one of those criteria is having professional indemnity insurance.
Right.
And I mean, I work in the engineering field, but part of that engineering isn't just design and documentation, it's also providing reports and advice. And the interesting thing that's happening now is that a lot of the underwriters for professional indemnity insurance, because of the losses that they've suffered because of various disasters, are actually exiting the market. And so for the first time, we're entering a situation where basically some consultants aren't actually able to get professional indemnity insurance. So it's pretty dire. And the thing that I was going to say, John, was that the reason that the government agencies aren't held accountable and there's not that accountability is because we don't really place a value actually on things. So until we start placing a value actually on assets, and those assets can be tangible and intangible, and those assets can be anywhere from infrastructure to roads. They could even be forests, they could be bushland, they could be the Great Barrier Reef. Until we start putting a value actually on those on those assets, and something that and how they go about that, there's probably a whole science and a thesis in how you'd actually go about that. But until they start putting the value, then there's no way of actually sort of measuring the good or the bad as far as the decision that's actually made. And therefore, because you can't measure that, then there's no accountability.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I think when we do consulting, I tend to think that we always offer some sort of a room for uncertainty, because especially when like, I think governments cannot simply pick some academic papers and use that and apply in the real world without looking at all the ifs, the conditionalities of certain approach to be views on the ground. And this is actually a big topic when it comes to science and policy settings, because in science we don't approach things in a very rigid way. There is always room for questioning, and for that one key of science is we try to speculate, in many ways. So speculation is one of the character of science, but it doesn't mean like it's just like an empty concept or something like that. So in that case, the legal dimension of that is still, I think, negligible. And it would be crazy if university people like us being hired and then being penalized.
Yeah. Sorry, John, I was just going to say that, most consultants these days always mitigate their risk, and they mitigate their risk when they prepare a report, or that, they provide advice by either referring to another report by another consultant, or they qualify it. And that happens everywhere. If you don't qualify and you don't mitigate your risk, you're crazy.
That's right. Yeah. So thank you for pointing out about risk management thing. That's a skill that we can also think about, because identifying risk management in government project setting is something that is not an easy task. But yeah, I think one way of learning about this is trying to benchmark from the existing project or any existing project that we can learn from. Any point from?
I just want to ask, is there any professional body where the person who wants to become a consultant can register? And if there is none, then how can we become visible in terms of marketing ourselves?
Sean wants to answer that question. Sean?
Yeah, there's a body that a number of consultants belong to called Consult Australia. They're an association of consultants that engineers, scientists, doctors, lawyers belong to, and what they essentially do is you pay an annual fee to belong, based actually on the size of your firm and your turnover, and their job is essentially they're more of like a lobby group. So what they actually do is they lobby government departments. They tend to be able to get appointments with the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet to actually discuss issues. Yeah, so there are bodies actually. So I mean, a lot of the bodies that consultants belong to are probably their own professional registrars, so where you actually become registered. But as far as like a general consulting group, there is a couple, and one of those is Consult Australia.
Right. Thank you for that intervention, Sean. Yeah, so Australia is pretty much a very regulated society. So even or the lobbyists are also regulated. So we studied about lobbying in 511, right? And yeah, so this is a little bit on the consulting side, and I'm sure it's pretty much regulated. In developing world, it's not a regular market, but they have some, especially engineering and construction, they have their own association of consulting. And as just pretty much, and business consulting, yes. For humanitarian, we might join this, yes, but you have to pay certain fees, and very often individual consulting are not able to pay that. There is for disaster, I think not yet for Australia. Of course, there are. It's not strict like that, but I think for development studies, we have Development Studies Association of Australia, and the membership can be professional, and there are some humanitarian colleagues signed that up as well to be members, and some of the Australian, the Australian Evaluation Society is also one of the groups that we can think about, but they are not necessarily focused on disasters. It's kind of general evaluation kind of communities. Apart from that, I'm not aware. For the British, I think they've come up with certain ideas around humanitarian professional association, but it's kind of work in progress. In the US, I noticed there's a few associations. In Australia, I think we think about that because disaster, it depends on the number of workforce in the sector and how we can define some kind of collective identity. So whether volunteers from Red Cross and other disaster volunteers want to join the club or not. Of course, volunteers is different group. For disaster response group, I'm not sure, but there is some sort of conferences of professionals that are becoming more regular nowadays. I'm not sure how this community will be ending up. It would be great to come up with this professional body. Yeah, maybe Sarajin can think about that. Right. So that's probably all. We can spend like another 10 minutes for housekeeping if you have some questions regarding the final one. I mean the final assignments. One or two have submitted. I don't want to mention that because it will be kind of putting pressure on you who.
I'm ready.
Already? Wow.
That's why I'm late on the others. I finished.
One.
I came here today at 4. I think we are in week 10.
No, that's.
I opened it and I said, we can. There is no face-to-face here, right? I went home. When I get home, I said, no, it's week 12. I'm back.
Right. Right. So, folks, that is the end of my talk around consulting. If you have some more questions, I'm happy to take. But if not, then let's talk about the final assignment. If you have. So I want to comment on one thing. So some of the colleagues who will be listening to this, please pay your attention as well. On writing references, you know that markers are always look for weakness. That's the mentality in marking. You have to be aware about this. That is the mistake is pretty often very obvious. So we are flexible here, especially me. I don't care whether you use APA or Harvard referencing system. You need to be consistent. And very often when you just cut the links without even mentioning anything, that is a very, very big mistake for postgraduate study. So please don't do that. I think some of you still probably lazy or probably overlooking. But if you can add like 2-3 minutes of cutting the name of the authors, the title, I think the outcomes will be better for you. And for me, my interest is you get better results, but it's hard to back you up if little mistakes like that happen.
So for the reference, you want the name of the writer and when and the article.
No, it's not like that. So when it comes to referencing, you need to pick whether you use Harvard system or you use APA system. Whatever system you have, there's always name, there's always the title, the date, and so on. Whether you put in front or at the back, we don't care. But some of the mistake is just like putting the links without saying anything.
Oh, no,
So that's
silly.
it's probably not in 513, in probably 511,
But if, excuse me, just 1 second, for
yeah.
the reference, if we put for you the link and you could actually press the link and it will take you exactly where it is, that's not good?
That's still a big mistake.
So that's a big mistake.
It's still big. Because you create.
The format is in the library.
Yeah, I know how to write it, but sometimes, like for some reference, if I use like, I don't remember if I changed it or no. One of them, it was like, just took it, like, and if you press on it, it will take you to that page directly to the everything. It's open. That's not good. Like when you press on it, it will like you don't have to copy paste. You just I make it able to, if you click in it, it will open to you.
Yeah, but that's not a standard writing.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, good.
That is the basic that we teach in the undergrad. You know, like.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
No, I'm not trying to be hard here,
No,
but
I just wanted to make it easier for you if you want to check the reference. So you just press in it, and it will take you directly. This is where it is from. This is where it is from. Like it will make it easier for when you want to check the reference. You don't.
It's not easy when it's in the videos. So because we watch videos.
One of my videos, I used the video from YouTube. I put the link for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Karen. APA is pretty simple.
I use APA.
APA.
I used APA, but like for one of the videos on YouTube, for one of my things here, I use the YouTube video.
Yeah.
I just put the link for it. Is that okay? Or because that's how I think it will make it easier, because it's a YouTube video, so the link is there. It will open directly the video for you.
Still, you need to write the title. You simply said Turkey 2020, and then you put in the reference with the link to the YouTube. Or you don't just put any random link under the videos, because we don't know what is that. And yeah, so just to help you guys. Yeah, so and there are heaps of videos around referencing, so please have a look as well. It's probably 1,000 already, how to reference in the videos. So referencing is one of the things that very often, and one thing, when you make an argument, you need to be clear about whether it's from you or it's from somebody else. So when it's come from you, you can say that you argue that blah blah blah. But still, when it comes to this kind of setting, even though you have got 10 years experience in the field, you can claim that. So based on your experience in the field, blah blah blah. But your experience in the field might be informed by something else, right? Like the way, like I studied a lot about early warning systems, about risk assessment. The way you draw your arguments about risk modeling, we know that you take it probably from somebody, and that somebody needs to be credited. So you cannot simply say that based on your knowledge of risk assessment, this is blah blah blah. So your responsibility is trying to be accountable, like what Sean has been saying about accountability. You need to provide a link to the original source. So whenever you turn into different paragraph and arguing that this is your analysis, make it clear to us. Because we argue that some of you are quite new in this field, how you came to know about these certain things.
Yeah, I didn't put anything. I just used everything from what professionals said.
So ways of knowing and ways of putting it needs to be also consistent. And yeah, so very often, also there is a second point here. Very often you try to impress me by telling me that you know a lot about the subject matter. And by doing that, you are very descriptive. The risk of being descriptive is like falling into the passing and sea level. We want something analog in that element. So you can, it's fine that you spend like the first 20% of your sections on, like, let's say that it is 5,000 words. You spend like the first parts being descriptive about what you want to do, about what you want to analyze, but don't spend much time on just describing from the very end, to the very end. It's just describing. Describing is good, that at the end you get some norms, normalized knowledge around the topic, subject matter. But that's not going to help for the external grader, who sometimes are quite harsh in comments. For videos, I'm quite generous, because in videos, one of the point of talking is people get the messages, right? So sometimes we cannot simply judge you, because the whole point of talking is inspiring people, right? So in that sense, it's kind of quite boring if you cite too much, or it is quite like suspicious if you cite too little. So it's about the balance. But so for the videos, don't worry. I try to be generous in that sense. But for the writing, it's written there, so it's very hard for us to back you up. That's kind of the mental that I have. Yeah, so don't worry about the first person. We allow you to use that. There's a big debate about the first person. I argue that. I think don't worry about me. In my unit, you can argue from first person. It doesn't make you less objective. But if you want to be safe, you can say the author argues. I don't mind about both. Just to make clear that this is the author or is it not, like, or from somebody else. So that's it, Karen. I hope you guys are. You want to be safe. That's good.
We all want to be safe, Karen.
With my unit, it's fine. But yeah, you need to think about the readers. Be mindful of the readers. So one of the readers could be people from external. If you are lucky.
We didn't put any of our ideas, if we didn't argue, or like we put facts, like literal paper, just put these people said this about this. This is how it goes in the emergency management. This is about the leadership in the emergency management, and this is the conclusion of it.
Yeah.
From people said that, from the referencing, from the resource, how we get to these reference, and all of these things. We break that all.
Yeah.
But I didn't put any of my ideas there.
Yeah, but when you select somebody, it's not a random process. You have to justify why out of 1,000 papers, you just select these 10 papers to build your arguments around this topic.
Because these are the papers that they talk about this. Like I get to 40, 45 papers. These are the papers that they just talk about these. Others just mention them in one paper or.
So put somewhere there that you are mindful about the variety of works around the topic, the key thinkers or whatever scholars who have been working on this, but you select the other ones because of what? Like, be mindful of why you select these fellas instead of others. So bring some judgment there why.
Is it okay if we take a theory from the? Is it okay if we take theory from one of the authors about his research, and then we support that through our own analysis from the practical examples?
That can be accepted. So you have their quotation and then you can provide. So I'm not actually, when it comes to your assignment, we cannot be very ideologist. We don't use ideology. So even though my position is left or right, I have to salute your opposition, opposite position by looking at the way you present the arguments and also the supporting evidence for your position. That's totally fine. So I'm not a dogmatist kind of person. You can be very left and arguing for leftist kind of ideas, and you can still get A for that. So this is not about right and wrong. This is how you present your evidence and convince us about this. So you have to be mindful about the grader. Often the grader are kind of like that. Yeah. So that's all. Have fun with the. Sorry for this. enjoy the writing, and hopefully we can.
See you around.
Yeah. See you around somewhere in the future. See you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So we probably maybe I can finish this. So.